I really think when we look at artificial intelligence and human intelligence and just in interspecial intelligence, if you want to go that far, the idea then is that with neural implants, with all the new technologies that are kind of bringing us closer to AI, and this is, by the way, it was this thinking that brought me to this idea of Kynismos, which is, let's just say there is a neural interface between us and AI. We kind of want what's going on in here and in here. We want that to be as private as you possibly can make it. And it's with that's the line of thinking that kind of brought this project along early on.
Welcome to the Imagine AI podcast. I'm your host, Chris Madden. And today we have with us Andrew Sispoidis, and he's going to talk about his AI company that he's building. And first, I want to get right into what it is you're building and the use case for it. So can you tell us?
Well, Chris, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's really exciting. So yeah, the use case. So we're starting a company called Kynismos AI. The concept is essentially a gateway to all the large language models and all generative AI, effectively that provides both the security, privacy, and those are the primary goals. And the idea behind that is we think AI is moving so fast. And the reality behind that progress is that just like we saw with social media, we're going to drop some balls along the way. I certainly don't think this is a malicious process, but I do think that there are hazards and dangers along that path. And so what we want to do is do it right this time. Allow for a gateway to be so individuals can use the internet, their information, everything they do, their interactions. It's basically a personal language model that resides locally, and that is under the control of the individual user. So essentially, there's no data leakage, nothing that is being used by LLMs or that's leaving the control of the individual. That's the primary goal behind it. And it's essentially for everyone. Our goal is to also reach out to platforms that any security-minded platform, any privacy-focused platform, whether it's a communication platform or a web browser. The idea is to be able to integrate into all of those, so that we can actually, just allow for much safer use of the internet effectively and safer use of AI.
That is great. And this isn't your first rodeo. You've had a long career in tech. And what really piqued my interest was you were a video game developer in the 90s, and you created a popular game that got great reach. So could you maybe give us a little bit of history into your background from those video game days to the evolution to today?
Absolutely. So God, I was lucky in my life, honestly. I got into an industry that was just out of college, was really young, early 20s. My brother and I, he was a big gamer forever. He was kind of the gamer geek and the tech geek in the family. And I always admired how he was older brother, always admired how he thought. And the idea was either start a game company or get a real job. It seemed like a no-brainer. So we decided to start a game company. Had we known what would have taken
started with your brother?
Yeah, started with my older brother. Yeah. And he's been a CTO in multiple companies that we worked on together. And he still remains a CTO in right now in the AI healthcare space. So yeah, it was great. It was a great experience. And let's set out to do this. And late 80s, early 90s really is when we kind of got kickstarted. And yeah, we were very lucky. We managed to hit the zeitgeist. We created a space strategy game called Pax Imperia. It kind of became a cult classic. And numbers then weren't like they were today, but we didn't care. We were just doing it because we thought it was a really cool thing to do. And we entered the industry. It was just prior to the massive consolidations that happened and kind of how the expansion, explosion of the industry. So we took that ride along with the industry and of course learned along the way. And in that process, met incredible people. I mean, you got to sit in a room with legends, basically, effectively, everyone from Peter Gabriel and all these amazing people back in that day that were in multiple industries and multiple disciplines. Just coming together, from scientists to artists to musicians, just all coming together at a time. This was based in San Francisco, Bay Area, a lot of it, New York, Boston. It was an amazing time, honestly. And so from my perspective, it kind of set the tone and set us in for a really positive direction.
How about Sid Meier? Did you ever meet him? I just watched the Civilization 7 walkthrough that was released today. I'm very excited for that game to be released.
Yeah, we met. Sid was, of course, a legend even then. Honestly. And, he remains so, and he's an incredible designer, just a luminary in the industry. And yes, Pax Imperia, we actually was to a large degree inspired by Sid and the work he did. And Will Wright with Maxis at the time, SimCity, we kind of wanted to find something that was between SimCity and Civilization. And it was just, in space, effectively, is what we were looking to create. So yeah, Sid, I met him a couple of times, and just a really, get Game Developers Conference in the first iterations of that. Just a great human being. Like the whole industry was full of really good people, though, honestly.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's jump ahead a little bit here and talk about you raising $450 million.
Over the course of, let's see, probably 8 companies, and helping other companies as well. So a lot of what I've done over the past, several years, probably a couple of decades really, is going to help early stage startups, both as an investor, but also as just an advisor, mentor, just jumping in to help where possible. And so in that process, fundraising is a core part of the initial process. You start a business, you have a concept, you have an idea. One of the first, you need fuel to get it moving. And so, it kind of helped in that process. But for my companies, first company I ended up raising external capital for was outside the game industry. It was a company called Axiom 8. It was basically collaborative communication technology. And we ended up raising, it was a $10 million, it was essentially a Series A, but by today's standards, it was a seed round, essentially. We just had idea on a napkin, effectively, and an incredible team. And at that time, this was early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. And, $10 million for, we called it a Series A, and it really effectively was because we accelerated the process of growth and, reaching the market. But, it was the first venture-backed round that I raised, and that kind of set along a path. So from there, then started several other companies. One was in the ad tech game space. Started a company called IGA Worldwide. And IGA was essentially bringing media directly into gaming environments. We had been in the gaming industry long enough. We knew a lot of the players. So we ended up working with, the major players in the industry, and we started off with developers and also moved to publishers, EA, Sony, all the large players basically. And then that was a second venture-backed company. That was a $17.5 million Series A. And then subsequently, I think another 25 and I think maybe 65 total into that company. And then continue to grow various companies, some successful, some wonderful explosions that you learn more from than you do from the successes. So over the years, ended up raising a couple $100 million. And the last project, I'm currently not directly involved anymore. I'm a large shareholder in. It's an energy tech company, supercapacitors specifically. And that was a company that the latest valuation was about $465 million. Basically, we acquired a public vehicle. And as a public company, we're up to $465 million. So that might be the number that you're referring to.
So a very, storied career. When did your site turn to AI and the new company you founded?
So AI has been at the periphery, machine learning early on, and in the game industry. The great thing about the game industry and getting that start was really we're at the vanguard of essentially every kind of technology for many years. And I'd say to this day, and looking at NVIDIA as an example, it started off, I remember those guys when they first started off and had a small booth at, I think it was a Macworld Expo. So NVIDIA was a tiny company at that time, but it started off in the game industry, and that's where it got its roots. So, you see AI effectively and kind of advanced technologies kind of found their root in gaming. And, I think it really kind of was one of the threads that allowed it to grow. So I had my eye on it for decades, and essentially on some level. It wasn't as we know it today. So I would say in the past 10 years, I got involved in cybersecurity. And in the cybersecurity arena, the idea, of course, again, in the past maybe 10 years, it really had become a very pertinent issue, national security issue, as well as just, in general, providing for privacy and security. That's kind of the blending of those two things came together for me probably about 3 years ago, when we realized that things are accelerating faster than we have any ability to track. But essentially, machine learning can do that. And I'd kind of been involved in those communities for long enough to say, okay, well, there's something coming. And then OpenAI was really the first, broke the floodgate. And once that happened, everything started to gel and say, okay, well, we can actually, this is ready for prime time. And of course, many people would argue that it's not yet. But the truth is that there's utility to today and extraordinary values coming out of, I'd say, machine learning more broadly. I make the distinction because people look at large language models as that's what AI is. And effectively, it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. And like everything else, we have to reduce it down to something that's comprehensible. So the idea is that it's been about 3 years that I kind of really focused on AI and, what can we do with it? After seeing large language models, the emergence of that technology, I thought, okay, what's next? If we saw what happened with social media, which I think is a bit tragic because it didn't have to go the way it did. And I think that it's not irreversible, but I think that it's created extraordinary problems in our world. Can we do it better this time? Can we do it in a way that puts privacy and security and safety first and allows for individual human beings to harness the power of artificial intelligence without having to sacrifice, staring into that abyss of all the hazards that come along with it? And I think that with Kynismos, we're going to find that balance. So, and with the partners that we end up working with, we'll find the balance.
Great. And so Kynismos, what does the name mean?
So it's a philosophical concept that means there is no separation between practice and theory. So the idea here being that, we really want to be true to the roots. Having been in technology for as many years as I have, what I learned, I think of myself more as an artist than a business person. And I think that the most advanced things come from that process. It's really an utterly creative process and a very collaborative process. And so I think the truer we can be to the essential principles that we set out to accomplish, and the deeper we connect to those, the less likely we are to veer from them. That's kind of a reminder personally, but also the concept behind a company is to stay true to those core roots, genuinely have privacy, genuinely have security, not going to pull a fast one on people and, we didn't tell you this part, but this is coming in the future. We didn't tell you this. And, this is kind of what we're actually doing. We really want to be true to that.
And so a client of Kynismos, and it's still like in beta, right? You haven't released it to the public yet. The business is going to be able to upload all their data, and then they're going to be able to use these OpenAI large language models, and you're going to be kind of the bridge between these LLMs and the company's data?
In a sense. So there's two applications. So you mentioned use case early on. So one use case is for individuals. The original concept came from individual use. How can we give individuals, people, families, as an example, the privacy and security that would allow for them to be, a parent to allow their children on the internet, as an example, allow their children to use AI in its full capacity without having to worry about that child's information reaching into the world and being used in some way that's nefarious or, just unhealthy or undesirable for the parent. So that was, the concept came from individual use first. But when you think about the use case for the corporate use case, it's pretty extraordinary because in the final iteration of the product, as we kind of start to evolve it into a real commercial release, right now it's really early, really nascent, and we're in the process of developing essentially what is an MVP, and we're actually raising for it now. So it's, we're going to be raising for that next set of development phases. But in this MVP stage, it's just a gateway effectively and allows for people don't have to actually upload anything, just interacting with the privacy model. The personal language model that resides locally, that interaction will then basically be able to reach out into all the other LLMs. And there's some emergent behaviors that come from this into all the LLMs. They're all moving towards open source, which I think is a fantastic thing. We'll be able to use those open source models and essentially allow an individual to work across those models seamlessly. You ask a question or you want to generate something using AI, you can use multiple models concurrently, simultaneously, and or individually, or it will find the best model. And it can learn that behavior over time because it'll learn the individual.
Do you personally have a favorite model right now?
It depends on the day that you ask, because they're constantly in flux. So I think Anthropic is doing a great job right now. I think they all have strengths and weaknesses. I think they're all at parity. And I really think that what we're going to see is a consolidation. There'll be large players working on the big, kind of those primary models. But I think there's going to be ecosystems that develop around that where emergent behavior will come from those that we haven't anticipated yet. But as it is right now, I love OpenAI. It's kind of a workhorse. I think this is a common answer. I think people use OpenAI as a workhorse. They use Anthropic for kind of more creative processes. And then Mistral is another great model, actually. They've done an incredible job. I was just in Paris recently, a few weeks ago, and they're doing incredible work.
And how do you see your company distinguishing itself or getting a moat for your business with these huge players out there that are changing and updating all the time? You're going to be using them. But then there are other companies that are, have a similar goal in mind of providing safe access to people's data.
So our goal is to leverage the open source community, essentially work with partners, integrate with partnerships into platforms, and really be open about our process. You mentioned the game industry. Early on, that was the nature of the game industry. And that has stayed with me. The idea is that our goal is to be as open as we possibly can and to provide utility as things advance. Now, in the next iterations, we're actually developing a lot of intellectual property. We have about 31 patents. Not in process, we haven't filed 31 patents yet, but there's about 31 patents that we're working on right now. Some of them are in the process of being filed right now. The idea is later iterations, we're talking about some pretty advanced technologies. We're using not only federated learning, but homomorphic encryption and all sorts of advanced things to really augment the state of the art, basically.
Great. Can you talk more about these patents that you're working on?
The core architecture that I can talk about, I think it's mentioned publicly at this point. It's essentially not in the MVP, but in the next iterations, it's essentially two artificial intelligences two AIs essentially working together One is what we call the Gnosis core. The Gnosis core is that personal language model that sits inside. And if you can imagine that like the nucleus, and that Gnosis core essentially has all the data and the information, data, and ultimately knowledge of the individual, preferences, ideas, kind of how that person is and has a relationship with the individual. And that is decoupled from what we're calling the coherence layer, which is the interactive layer to the outside world, which is a separate AI. Those two things will interact together, but in a decoupled way, so that the coherence layer will communicate with the outside world. As information flows through the coherence layer, it will basically, the best way to describe it, and this is where some of the patents play a role, is that through zero knowledge proofs and through basically some advanced algorithms, be able to generate what is effectively capacitance or curiosity within the Gnosis core, and then the Gnosis core responds with that's interesting. Effectively, give me more of that, without giving away any specific information about the individual user. So then the coherence layer goes out and to all the other language models, whichever ones are appropriate, and then it will basically, that's where the interaction happens. So the patents are in those general areas, security, privacy, but also kind of how those things work together.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was wondering how people are going to be able to do that, like keep that data blocked off. And so you're creating these two separate layers that there's not going to be the leakage of private information to the outside layer.
That's exactly it. And that's what our core focus will be, to have extreme levels of security wrapped around this, because we really think it's going to take that. As an example, so one of the things that we're looking at, again, we don't actually have a core solution for this yet, but and it's early, and we need to kind of capitalize the business properly to do this. But one of the things we're looking at is code injections, AI basically generating code injections into for malicious activity. It's really hard now to stop that, and AI won't be able to stop that because that's effectively spoofable. And so can we create a situation where we act as, because of the dual layers of process, can we act as best way to describe it would be a sandbox, and very similar to how antivirus works, a sandbox with all the knowledge of all the various malicious activity and that is happening around AI, effectively around large language models. Can we act as that sandbox, effectively do the processing there, and essentially not let any negative things come through, that kind of thing. And again, being vague about it because honestly, we haven't refined that process, but we think we may have some solutions around that kind of stuff. So that's the advanced stuff that we're really excited about.
That's incredible. And can you talk briefly about your team that you're forming?
Yeah, it's all very nascent right now. I have a number of names circled at this point, and of course the interest is there. And as I mentioned earlier, we're in the capital raise phase right now. At early stage, we're looking
gathering the team.
We're gathering the team,
you're assembling the squad to take on this endeavor.
Yeah,
nice,
absolutely,
very, very cool. Well, I'd like to move now a little bit into more general thoughts on AI. And you've seen the space evolve and technology evolve over 3-4 decades now. And I wonder, where do you see this going? Where do you see the future of AI taking us?
Well, I think, it's kind of what time horizon, do we look at? And if we looked at, let's just say I was doing these briefings essentially for, we're working in the cybersecurity arena, pretty high level. And the idea was, let's look at a 15-year time horizon. Kind of, if we took put the futurist hat on, let's look at a 15-year time horizon. And then let's see what technologies are emerging and what technologies might have some value in that time frame and present risk and so on. And so if we took that time horizon, 15 years, I think that we're really looking at, I hesitate to use hybridized because that's not the right word, but I really think when we look at artificial intelligence and human intelligence and just in interspecial intelligence, if you want to go that far, the idea then is that with neural implants, with all the new technologies that are kind of bringing us closer to AI, and this is, by the way, it was this thinking that brought me to this idea of Kynismos, which is, let's just say there is a neural interface between us and AI. We kind of want what's going on in here and in here. We want that to be as private as you possibly can make it. And it's with that's the line of thinking that kind of brought this project along early on, philosophically anyways. But 15-year time horizon, I think that, there'll be a very seamless blending between our cognition and AI. I don't think that that's far-fetched, and I don't think it's not all that scary if we can provide the proper boundaries in place. So that's one example. That's one area.
For me, I live here in South Korea, and having, something that can just translate stuff for me, like instantly without me having to like input stuff, like that's gonna be so valuable for me. And like the technology is incredible right now. Like I could, turn on the thing and it'll translate back for me. But to have something that is just there that can just do it and tell me and either show it to me. And so it's either something in my ear that's like translating stuff constantly, but it needs to have that visual element too, where it's like, I can just look at a sign and then it'll translate it for me. And that mode, what's that going to be? AR glasses, I guess.
Or direct neural implant. I mean, that's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, not only possibility, I think it's actually coming. I think, it depends on the time horizon, and I think your evolution is right when you say that. I think augmented reality is the next phase, a pretty major one. And I think that's going to take some time to adopt because it's a little clumsy now, but I think that's, ambient technology effectively is becoming more reality. And then from there, I think, a more integrated approach like neural implants. Not that I'm not even advocating for it, but I think it's likely to happen.
Can you tell us about Neuralink's recent breakthrough?
They're basically allowing for an individual who was unable, I think it may be paraplegia or quadriplegia. I'm not sure the actual condition that the individual is undergoing at this point, but my understanding is that it's allowing for just speech where he couldn't speak before. It's allowing for the use of a computer where he couldn't use a computer before just by thinking about it. And it's iterative as it just gets better over time. It learns and gets better over time. So his facility gets better over time. And that's in his first iteration of it. So I think it's not long before we're going to see some pretty amazing things there.
Yeah. And so are you going to sign up for it if you get a brain implant to do this?
So if we can do what we're trying to do, then I wouldn't have a problem with it. If we can actually provide that layer of security, I really believe in individual privacy and individual sovereignty, I guess you could say. And, that's critically important. Our minds should be somewhat sacred. And I think if we can provide for that, then I think that'd be amazing.
I mean, what's the dark road here if security is not taken seriously?
I think the dark road is pretty dark. And I think that human nature effectively, I think what artificial intelligence essentially does really, really well is augment, or rather, it augments human nature. So the idea is that the worst of humanity and certainly the best of humanity will be so augmented that we don't have, as a society, we don't have the tools to deal with the kinds of things that could come up. And I don't think it's the AI. I don't think we're talking about a cognitive machine. But we are talking about human nature accelerated and augmented to such a degree that most human nature is, it's black and white. I think it's, and there's a lot of gray in the middle, but it's the human systems that, whether it's language or culture, those are the things that essentially, smooth out that curve, don't make it as black and white. So I think that we don't have the tools to bring that under control unless, privacy and security are met as a precondition.
Yeah, that's interesting that you put it, that it's like augmenting human nature, AI. Can you paint like a specific example of something that would not be good that can happen with AI? I mean, bad actors using it to farm data to trick people. I mean, that's there.
That's there, and that was there. I guess you could argue, for example, that one of the most fragile systems that we have today, I would say that they are systems that are hyperscaled. And I think that certainly politics is a great example of that. I think that politics and cognition together at scale are extremely dangerous. You're playing with fire in a way that we never could before. So that's an area just as an example. And yes, the misinformation, disinformation, all that kind of stuff, I think we can generally manage that as we know it today. But I really believe that unchecked, and again, without the privacy layer integrated into it, I don't think who are the actors that we're talking about? They may be nation states. They may be just criminal actors. They may be essentially emergent behavior that results from, the coalescence of all these various systems. So I think we're going to hit some rough seas, and I think we ought to have a seaworthy vessel to do that. That's kind of the baseline.
I think there needs to be a mandatory class in high school at the latest is, how to parse through all of this internet stuff and all these interactions that having information that's being thrown at you. And crazy seeing the Grok's AI, X's AI, and the image generation that came out this last week, and just like anything you want these famous people to do, you can type it in and there's a pretty good picture of these famous people doing that, illicit thing, a ridiculous thing, and crazy. And it is almost like, and social media is going to that's the transport of all of this information. And there's already all these examples of like in Myanmar and the Facebook, WhatsApp there, just kind of like misinformation being spread like wild. And you have people that aren't willing to question the validity of things. And then it's like, it's all like information warfare where it's like, oh, this is stuff that's like helping what I want done. So it's like, okay, whatever. As adults that like question, it's like, okay, but then you just worry about the general population.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we need to, really, we collectively need to be thinking in that way. I mean, it's not the same world that we grew up in. And I think no matter what generation you are, even Gen Z today, I think it's moving so fast that they're going to fall behind. They're actually falling behind and they don't even know it.
We're all going through this rapid change in our society, and we're all facing it. And so just being adaptable and is very key skill set you need.
And the tools should be there as well.
That is kind of some of the dark, things that we're going to be battling with this changing technology and rapidly, advancing technology. Let's talk about like the bright spots, because from an education standpoint, I think it's huge. And I wonder where you maybe talk about the education field or where you see the brightest spot for AI.
Yeah, it's a great point. So certainly, education, I think, will mean something else in the near future. I really think that we're not going to be training people to do jobs as much as training the mind to have greater acuity, to have an ability to discern better. I mean, those kinds of things will be real core skills. I think human brain is incredible at that. If we kind of move along that path. So I think education will be discernment more than anything else, because information will be available to us, and kind of multiple iterations of an idea can basically be generated and and ultimately rendered into reality. Let's say it's whatever. Let's just say you're writing a book. There's no reason why AI aided you wouldn't be able to write a complete novel and have it be unique in no time. And I want 3 iterations of that, and I want to be able to test it against an audience very easily and quickly. And all that could be done if all those things. From one perspective, we have a lot of work to do from a legal perspective and from, intellectual property, things like that. But I think that education itself will be really about, I have to say, I think that's more about discernment than anything else, because the information will be so available. And so everyone will have access and facility with it. So I think education won't be necessarily as we know it today. Though I have to say, on the other hand, we think of AIs as being these brilliant tools, and they are. But, of course, this is a couple of weeks ago, I read about the idea that AI is terrible at doing math. Large language models are awful at doing math. They don't understand what they're actually doing. So, of course, how can they be creative in that way? So we're going to need people for, again, I call it discernment, because I really think that that's at the kind of the root level. So I think that's the direction things will probably go as far as that's concerned. But that's a bright spot. Healthcare, massive bright spot. Also being able to discover new materials, being able to look at physics in a new way, being able to all sorts of amazing things that these tools will be able to leverage. So it's an incredible opportunity. I think AI is going to represent for us, not just AI, but other technologies layered over that. But it's certainly one of the core operating systems that we're migrating to.
Do you have children, Andrew?
Do not. Nephews, yes, and they're great. We don't have children, no. But it's something that I care a lot about. I would say it's something I care a lot about, because you see young people are, it's a tough world for them.
What advice would you have for your nephews in raising them in this day and age for their teenage years and thinking about the future and what subject to study, what career to take?
It's a great question, because let's just say teenagers now, the concept of a job as we know it's not going away, but the nature of it, the kind of how you execute on that job is going to change, and it's changing dramatically right now. As an example, I'm seeing AIs that are specialized AIs that are, and I tie it back to AI because I think that's going to play at the core of all human endeavors, particularly young people. So I think that are going to have to contend with this. So I would say if you're a young person today, focus on the midterm and the long term. Don't look at what's happening. Be knowledgeable of what's happening today, but don't focus on that being the thing, because Instagram was the thing 3 years ago, let's say, and tomorrow it won't be. Now it's TikTok and and so on. So those things, the platforms, those are fads. They're going to, come and go in the history, kind of with the sands of history are going to kind of wash over those things. But look at the midterm and then, think about your core principles in the long term. So really do that analysis, really do that kind of soul searching, but do it in a way that is based on whatever core principles you grew up with and you believe in. The idea that, for example, making sure that as an individual in the world, you're contributing something of value. So don't worry about the getting of the job, because just stay current with the tools and you'll get the job, whatever job that is. And of course, not all jobs. I suppose if you're an athlete, that's still going to require you to be a good athlete. I would say it doesn't change that much, but it goes back to core principles. I think if you had to give advice, it's probably stay current, look at the future, look at yourself and how you can provide some good in the world. It's really, I think it boils down to those core things broadly.
How about for graduates or people entering the job market today? What advice would you have for them to land a job?
If you're looking for a job today, learn the tools. Again, I think AI is going to play at the center of that. Like really master that. Find creative ways to use those tools to your advantage. I think that's the key. I think that's going to be in demand for probably the next decade. Certainly, it's going to be the most in demand set of skills. And I think that you'll be, from an income earning perspective, I think you're going to find the greatest ramp there. So learn the tools and be on top of that and just master that. Allow your creativity to integrate to that.
Creativity, that's such an important skill to nourish and to practice. And also being interested in learning for learning's sake and discovering new things. And there's so much to learn, and there's so many niches and so many different careers and vast amount to learn. And then stay curious in those things. And then with these AI tools, you can spend hours just going and learning in details, in depth on all sorts of things. Do you have advice or thoughts on how someone can stay like a lover of learning and be a lifelong learner?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I consider myself more of an artist than a business person. Of course, business is part of the art, really, ultimately. And so I would say that.
Well, Andrew, I think that's a very inspirational note to end on here. But I do have one more question, and that is, do you still play video games today?
Oh, man, that's a great question. And I'm embarrassed to say that. So, no, I don't. Not because I don't want to. I have, right now I'm traveling, which is, but you brought it up and it's actually interesting because recently I was just talking with my wife about this. I kind of want to dive back in because they're so immersive now. It's amazing. I actually want to build games again. I kind of feel that that's a core, it's a growing desire at this point again. So the answer is I don't, and it's wrong of me. I need to. Good.
Yeah. And I think that the gamification of things and like this startup that you're building, like having the gamification on it in there to want to engage with the AI and to trust it, and you're going to build it so that you can trust it. And I think it's very important. Your gaming background will help a lot there. Any final word that you have regarding your startup and how people can find you and learn more?
So we have a website, Kynismos.ai, Kynismos.ai. Or of course, we're on X, on LinkedIn. We don't have really used Instagram yet in any serious way. Very, very small team. But the idea here is what we want to do is create something we don't want to create a massive corporate entity. What we want to do is actually serve humanity in a positive way, and not purely idealistically. There's a very practical and very, I guess you could say selfish reason for it, because I want to be able to help create a world that will be a really enjoyable one to exist within. And I think that AI could change that one way or the other. And I'd like for it to go the right way. So involvement, I would say that, we're raising capital now, but that's an early stage process. Other than that, just stay tuned, really. I mean, you can sign up on our website just for a newsletter effectively, but we wouldn't mail you anything in more than maybe once or twice, period.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, I found this very fascinating conversation. It was a pleasure talking with you. With Imagine AI Live, we're having our second annual conference in Las Vegas at the end of May. And the first one was a huge success. And we just had a day event in New York in July. And we might have one more day event, but definitely in Las Vegas, a big 2-day extravaganza, a lot of fun, a lot of great speakers and guests. So we'd love to have you there as well.
I would love to attend. Please send me the information, and love to. That sounds fantastic. And I heard the New York one was great. I'm sorry I missed it.
Okay, Andrew, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Chris.